Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal when Christina first devised her calculated scheme to seduce Ava and ultimately dismantle her influence in Port Charles. Cody believed he was merely a pawn, an expendable piece in Christina's intricate game of control, vengeance, and manipulation. He agreed to take part in the plan, albeit reluctantly, and only after demanding a hazard bonus from Christina due to his lingering unease over Ava's violent and enigmatic past. Cody had heard the whispers. Stories of bodies, betrayals, and lies buried beneath Ava's elegant veneer. He entered the arrangement with clear parameters: charm her, distract her, report back. But as his role deepened and his proximity to Ava intensified, something unexpected began to shift within him. Ava's cool seduction, her poised demeanor laced with a knowing smirk, and her chilling elegance fascinated Cody in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her ability to make him feel seen and invisible in the same breath disarmed him. The line between duty and desire blurred with every lingering glance, every shared drink, and every flirtatious exchange that no longer felt like an act. What began as a mission slowly transformed into a mental and emotional entanglement, one that left Cody wrestling with feelings that defied logic and loyalty. But it was precisely that emotional proximity that led Cody to uncover the secret no one, not even Christina, had seen coming. One evening, under the guise of retrieving a misplaced item, Cody slipped into Ava's private office. What he found buried beneath false folders and encrypted drives shook him to his core. Tucked behind innocuous receipts and shell company files were chilling documents detailing encrypted communications between Ava and an anonymous partner. The messages bore veiled but unmistakable threats and one specific directive issued just days before the fire at Charlie's pub: clean it up. Make sure there's nothing left. Cody's heart pounded as he pored over altered security footage clearly manipulated to obscure key moments the night of the fire. The implications were terrifying. Not only had Ava known about the planned attack, she had orchestrated it, or at the very least sanctioned it. Christina's near-death had not been a tragic byproduct of Sonny's war with Sidwell, it had been a deliberate move in a broader, more malicious scheme. Cody now faced an excruciating dilemma. Continue the seduction, keep Ava close, and potentially become complicit in her crimes, or betray her to protect Christina and expose a woman capable of unimaginable cruelty. While Cody waged a private war within himself, Christina's own instincts grew sharper, more suspicious. Her trauma from the fire never truly healed, and the whispers of paranoia in her mind grew louder with each encounter with Ava. She noticed inconsistencies in Ava's behavior. A glance too long, a slip in conversation, a sudden change in tone whenever the fire was mentioned. Christina's gut screamed that Ava was not just an opportunist, but the architect of her pain. When Cody finally confessed the truth, it shattered Christina. He didn't dramatize it, didn't ask for forgiveness or understanding, he simply laid out the facts. At first, Christina recoiled, her trust in him bruised and her spirit cracked open by the horrifying realization that the woman she had pretended to seduce might have plotted her death. But as Cody produced the evidence, the messages, the altered videos, the financial records linking Ava to a shell company registered under Sidwell's umbrella, Christina's pain hardened into resolve. She didn't report it to the authorities. She didn't storm into Ava's office with accusations and fury. Instead, she became as cold and calculating as the woman who tried to destroy her. Christina leaked the truth piece by piece through a shadowy blogger whose posts ignited a media firestorm. Over the course of 24 hours, Port Charles was flipped on its axis. The blog's exposé featured damning text exchanges, audio clips hinting at Ava's involvement in the attack, and a side-by-side analysis of tampered security footage that painted an irrefutable picture of deception. Ava's name exploded across headlines, her reputation disintegrating in real time as the public turned against her. Former allies vanished. Longtime associates distanced themselves. Even those who once feared her began to speak out. She was no longer the glamorous enigma with a dangerous past, she was a pariah, a potential criminal, a woman whose hunger for power had nearly cost a young woman her life. Christina watched it all unfold with a calm detachment that masked the emotional storm raging within her. She had exposed Ava, yes, but the scars of what had nearly happened, what could have happened, would take far longer to fade. She had played the game, outwitted the opponent, but at what cost? Cody, meanwhile, found himself caught between the wreckage of Ava's downfall and the silence of Molly, whose trust in him had fractured upon learning of his duplicity. Though he had chosen truth, he now faced the consequences of every lie he'd lived along the way. Ava, disgraced and isolated, vanished from the public eye. Rumors swirled that she had left town, while others insisted she was plotting a resurgence. But deep down, Christina knew that Ava would not disappear so quietly. A woman like Ava didn't go into hiding, she re-emerged with a vendetta. And when she did, there would be a reckoning not just for Christina, but for Cody, Sonny, and anyone who thought they could extinguish the fire of a woman who once mastered the art of surviving in shadows. The truth had been exposed, but in Port Charles, exposing the truth was never the end. It was merely the beginning of the next war. The takedown of Ava sent shockwaves far beyond her personal life. It shattered her standing in the elite circles of Port Charles, where reputation was currency and power often changed hands over whispered conversations and veiled threats. Once feared, envied, and reluctantly respected, Ava found herself cast out by the very social sphere that had once cautiously embraced her. Former allies severed ties in an instant, sponsors pulled out of business ventures without warning, and invitations to exclusive events vanished as if she'd never existed. The downfall wasn't just personal, it was systemic, a complete social excommunication. She became a symbol of scandal, her name whispered only in hushed tones, associated not with glamour and intrigue but with betrayal, arson, and near murder. Ava, once a woman who commanded rooms with a glance, now found herself alone at empty tables, her presence unwelcome even in the places she helped build. Meanwhile, Cody, the very man who unearthed the truth, found himself in an increasingly perilous position. Though he had done what he believed was right, exposing Ava's involvement in the Charlie's pub fire to save Christina, he had also inadvertently painted a target on his own back. Port Charles had long been a city where secrets were currency, and Cody had proven himself capable of unearthing those secrets. That made him dangerous, not just to Ava, but to the many shadowy figures whose names appeared in her buried communications. It didn't take long before Cody began to feel the weight of surveillance. His apartment was broken into without signs of forced entry, his phone began experiencing strange glitches, and a dark sedan followed him for blocks on more than one occasion. Whispers in alleyways and sideways glances from strangers told him everything he needed to know. He had become a liability in a game that didn't forgive exposure. Complicating matters further was Molly, who had slowly grown closer to Cody in the months leading up to the Ava operation. What had begun as cautious curiosity had evolved into mutual trust and something quietly romantic. But that trust crumbled the moment she learned of Cody's deception. Though he tried to explain, insisting the kiss with Ava was part of a mission orchestrated by Christina. Molly couldn't shake the sting of betrayal. It wasn't just the physical act that wounded her, it was the secrecy. The realization that Cody had been moving in a world of seduction and strategy, lying to her while appearing emotionally present, was more than she could process. The knowledge that he had become emotionally entangled, even if unwillingly, in a psychological game involving her own extended family made the betrayal feel even more intimate and layered. No matter how often Cody repeated that his feelings for Molly were real and separate, a shadow of doubt remained. And in the fragile landscape of Port Charles, doubt was enough to destroy even the strongest bonds. As for Christina, victory came with a price far steeper than she anticipated. Although she had succeeded in exposing Ava and removing a dangerous manipulator from her orbit, the emotional toll was staggering. Ava's betrayal had reopened old wounds Christina had tried to bury. The fire, the fear, the agonizing weight to be pulled from the smoke-filled bar, and the days spent wondering if she would live. The psychological scars ran deep, and even as the public praised her bravery, Christina felt no sense of peace. The mask of strength she wore in public hid the sleepless nights, the flashbacks, and the guilt over involving Cody in something that had now spiraled far beyond her control. Adding to Christina's emotional turmoil was the reaction of her mother, Alexis, whose trauma surrounding Sam's death had never fully healed. When the fire at Charlie's pub nearly claimed another daughter, it reignited every fear Alexis had buried. Her breakdown was sudden and all-consuming. She began to spiral, projecting her grief and terror onto Christina, sometimes lashing out, other times withdrawing completely. Alexis's panicked whispers of, "I won't bury another daughter," echoed through their home, casting a suffocating weight over every conversation. Christina, already grappling with her own trauma, now found herself trying to parent the very mother who had once been her anchor. The role reversal only deepened her inner conflict. How could she celebrate justice when the collateral damage included her own family's emotional stability? In the weeks that followed, Ava disappeared from public view, but her presence lingered like a ghost over Port Charles. Cody remained on edge, constantly looking over his shoulder, unsure which enemy would come for him first. Molly withdrew, needing space to process her pain. Christina buried herself in volunteer work, advocacy, anything to distract from the nightmares she had lived through and the cracks now splitting her world apart. The truth had been revealed, yes. But in Port Charles, every truth bore a price, and some prices left scars that never fully healed. Christina, though she had succeeded in toppling Ava and exposing one of the darkest conspiracies Port Charles had seen in years, now found herself standing at the precipice of something far more terrifying than she had anticipated. The victory was hollow in its aftermath, echoing with a question that refused to leave her mind. Had she truly escaped the grip of violence and treachery that had nearly consumed her, or had she simply become a part of it? In orchestrating Ava's public destruction, she had relied on the very tactics she once abhorred: manipulation, deception, and calculated vengeance. She had turned someone else's secrets into weapons and watched with cold resolve as the pieces fell. What began as a desperate need to reclaim her power now felt uncomfortably close to the very darkness she had always sworn she would never let define her. The haunting realization that she might have crossed an invisible line began to seep into every corner of Christina's life. Her nights were sleepless, not because of fear, but because of reflection. Her mind replayed every moment: Cody's discovery of the evidence, the decision not to go to the authorities, the deliberate leak to the media. In her most vulnerable moments, she questioned whether the world was truly safer now that Ava had been ruined, or if all she had done was awaken new, more dangerous enemies lurking in the shadows. She had won the battle, but at what cost? Had she saved herself, or simply surrendered to the cycle of retribution that had already claimed so many in her family? Cody, too, found no solace in the aftermath. Though he had acted with the belief that exposing the truth would bring justice and protect Christina, the emotional and moral weight of his choices bore down on him with increasing intensity. The fallout with Molly was just the beginning. The look of hurt and betrayal in her eyes haunted him far more than any threat Ava could ever pose. He had thought he could compartmentalize his mission, draw clean lines between duty and personal loyalty, but life in Port Charles never allowed for such clarity. By stepping into Christina's world of secrets and danger, Cody had lost more than just Molly, he had lost a piece of himself. The man who once sought truth above all else now questioned what that truth was worth if it left behind broken trust and a scarred conscience. Ava, once considered untouchable in the social and criminal undercurrents of Port Charles, had been brought to her knees, but she was far from defeated. Beneath the ruins of her former life simmered a fury that no public disgrace could extinguish. Stripped of influence and abandoned by allies, she was a woman with nothing left to lose, and that made her more dangerous than ever. Her mind replayed the events that led to her fall, dissecting every betrayal, every whisper that turned against her, and at the center of it all stood Christina and Cody. Ava's hunger for retribution was no longer about reclaiming power. It was personal, intimate, and irreversible. In her isolation, she began to plan, to map out every weak point in the armor of those who had dared to unmask her. The storm she was preparing was not one of public scandal. It would be quiet, surgical, and devastating. In the silence that followed the chaos, Port Charles itself seemed to change. The power structures that once felt immutable now teetered with uncertainty. Old alliances dissolved while new, shadowy ones began to form. With Ava in the shadows, Cody compromised, and Christina at a moral crossroads, the city was on the verge of a deeper unraveling. Secrets that had been buried for decades started to stir, as those who had remained quiet out of fear now saw opportunity, or necessity, in action. For every truth revealed, two more remained hidden, and for every figure brought low, another waited in the wings, ready to seize the vacuum of influence. The illusion of finality vanished. There would be no clean ending, no moment of closure. What Christina had started was not a conclusion but a catalyst. The delicate balance of Port Charles had been disrupted, and in its place came a tense, breathless anticipation, a sense that something worse was coming. Because in a world where truth is currency and revenge is tradition, the game never ends. It only changes players. And so, in the ever-shifting shadows of Port Charles, the aftermath of Ava's fall left the city suspended in a fragile calm, one not born of peace, but of quiet unrest. Christina, once the unsuspecting victim nearly lost in the flames, now stood as both avenger and survivor, but her triumph felt tainted. She had faced the monster that tried to destroy her, only to discover that to defeat it, she had to wear its face. Each choice she made in her pursuit of justice echoed with the uneasy truth that some victories come at the cost of innocence. Her soul bore the bruises of what she had become, resilient, but no longer untouched by the darkness she once despised. Cody, the reluctant hero who walked the line between right and wrong, emerged from the firestorm with scars that ran deeper than he would admit. He had uncovered the truth, exposed a villain, and protected a friend, but in doing so, had fractured the budding love he shared with Molly and glimpsed the price of getting too close to secrets that should never have been uncovered. The clarity he once held about justice had dissolved into shades of gray, and in those murky waters, he found himself searching for who he really was now that the lies were over but the damage remained. Ava, stripped of her power and position, was now a force untethered by reputation, unbound by expectation, and unshackled by alliances. If she once played the game with cunning and poise, now she would return to it fueled by vengeance, her strategies no longer tempered by the need to maintain appearances. Her silence was not surrender, it was the calm before retaliation, the quiet before she would strike back not to rebuild, but to burn down those who thought they could reduce her to ash. And beyond the lives of these three, the city itself watched, waiting. Port Charles was no stranger to resurrection, betrayal, or the tangled web of consequence that followed every act of revenge. It had seen empires fall, families fracture, lovers betray, and enemies become allies. But now, something had shifted. The exposure of Ava's crimes had not just ended one chapter, it had ripped open a new, darker volume in the legacy of power and survival that defined the city. Old secrets began to stir. New vendettas took root. And the line between justice and vengeance blurred until it was nearly invisible. In this new reality, no one remained untouched. Not Christina, not Cody, not Molly, and certainly not Ava. Each bore their wounds, carried their truths, and stood at the brink of what was to come. Because in Port Charles, peace is always temporary, truth is always double-edged, and every end is merely a prelude to the next betrayal. The game was far from over, it had only evolved. And as the final echoes of the fire faded, the true battle began in the hearts, minds, and shattered loyalties of those left standing. Somewhere beneath the facade of normalcy, Port Charles braced itself for the storm that was already brewing. The destruction of Ava's empire may have silenced her name in the press, but it had amplified it in the places that mattered most, in the whispers behind closed doors, in the encrypted messages passed between the powerful and the damned. She had become a ghost of her former self, but one far more dangerous than any living threat. Ava was no longer bound by the politics of image or the fragility of alliances, she had become pure intent, vengeance sharpened by humiliation and exile. The names that had participated in her downfall, Christina, Cody, even those on the periphery like Molly and Alexis, had now been etched into her memory like wounds that would never scar over. And when Ava moved again, it would not be with warning or mercy. Christina, though surrounded by supportive voices, began to feel the loneliness of someone who had stepped too far into a world she didn't fully understand. Her family praised her strength, but they didn't know the full extent of what she had done, or what she had lost. There was no glory in the quiet unraveling of a woman's life, even one as dangerous as Ava. There was only weight. She began to question everything. Whether justice could exist without destruction, whether her motives had been pure or poisoned by fear and anger. She'd won, yes, but sometimes, the worst punishment was living long enough to ask yourself if the war was worth the blood you spilled inside your own soul. Cody, increasingly isolated, tried to reconnect with Molly, but each attempt felt like stitching wounds that wouldn't close. Trust, once broken, didn't return whole, it returned brittle. He found himself pacing the same streets where he used to feel certain of his place in the world, now a man displaced, marked. The criminal underworld knew what he'd done, and though some admired it, others wanted retribution.